In keeping with this topic of empowerment, I think it's really important for us to really dive into a conversation around women's conditioning. So, I want you to just kind of keep a little bit of an open mind here. So, what we're going to learn about today is sort of how women have become conditioned and what that really means and how we're continuing to play that out. I'm also going to give you a little tip at the end about how you can start to get a little bit curious about your own conditioning and the level that we are conditioning. Now, Jordan Peterson is, in the media a lot lately, and sort of in my own, I want to say in saying what I'm about to say, I haven't really followed much of his work, just some Coles Notes sort of things. But one of the things that has come up recently in sort of an educational or academic dialogue that was coming up around social theory and around gender roles and all of this stuff is, are women naturally more subservient? And Jordan Peterson sort of takes this stance that women naturally, are in a more subservient role. Now, being an independent modern woman like you are, we sort of naturally get our back up about that. I've also trained and studied under an incredible amount of women, shamans, female shamans, sages, wisdom keepers, earth keepers, medicine keepers, men and women. And there is a deep conversation in the world about masculine and feminine energy, not gender-based, but an energy base. We all have something that we bring to the world that's a little bit different, and we're supposed to bring that to the world a little bit different. Now, we've got these kind of polarizing conversations that start to happen around, are women naturally subservient? Are we less assertive? Are we more passive naturally? And if we didn't have all this conditioning, will we, be a little bit more passive in our role in the world? And, some people believe, Peterson being one of them, that a lot of the challenges and problems in the world today are because, women are climbing the ladder where we're really not supposed to. So you could already tell how I feel about that. And then of course we have some of these divine conversations, the divine feminine conversations, which also really put women into this place where, we need to really soften, and we naturally have a softer energy and these kinds of things. There's a difference that we bring to the table. But the question that I always pose and that I ask, through many of the studies that I've done, especially under Callista Pinkola Estes, who wrote Women Who Run with the Wolves, and Carol Christ, and some of these leading women in women's empowerment, where we're really having a deep conversation about who women were. If we really start to look at the history of women, so there's so much history where, as an example, women were actually the people that led communities. We look at sort of this patriarchal, Catholicized, colonialized version of what women have become, sort of as the first people who were conquered, in this, is that women were made from the rib of Adam, so we're naturally indebted to men, sort of conversation that's been happening for many of us. And then women with the original wound or the original sin of being, kicked out of paradise, the Garden of Eden. We were kicked out, and that was women's fault, and we were the ones who kind of brought the wrath of God onto, so there's so much here for us to unpack and for us to really look at in terms of this constant conditioning that women have undergone. But if we really go back into ancient society and how things were done, the red tent is a big revival that we're having right now, because for women, many of us growing up as girls, when we got our period and we learned who to talk to it about and how to hide it and how to be discreet about what was happening, as if this half of the world has a period and it's the most shameful thing that we could imagine. The fact that this happens to us, it was something that we needed to hide, a lot. So there's a lot of connotation just around even our whole process of existence. And yet that is the very thing that allows our existence to happen. Women are the ones who give birth to life, literally, through our physical body. We give birth to life. We're the only thing strong enough on the planet to actually do that. And yet all the processes around it were made shameful and dirty and all of these things. But the red tent, when societies originally practiced the red tent, it was patriarchally moved into this place where women were removed from society because they were dirty while they were bleeding. But in actuality, it was considered the most sacred time in a woman's life, and that was when she had bigger powers and a bigger intuitive connection. Ancient societies knew that women were the place of birth. They were the creators, right? I believe that it is the OMG, Regina, I can't remember her last name right now, but she's written a book where basically she says, God exists as a male force, but he was impotent until the goddess came along and turned him on, So there has to be a masculine and a feminine in order to procreate. That's just sort of, natural biological perspectives or processes that are actually sort of happening there. And when we look at some of this stuff, women were basically said, okay, you're dirty. This is why you have to be left from society. That was what it was made to mean. But ancient societies knew that women had an incredible power. There was an access to something beyond us because of the gift of being able to sort of give birth to life that was given. So women were removed and sent to the red tent, is what it was called, the red tent, was because she was considered to be at her highest power at that time. So she would have visions, get messages when she wasn't sort of in the day-to-day of her life. I don't know any woman today who would be like, no, thanks, I don't want a week away, every single month. I'm like, sign me up. All of us would be like, sign me up, please. But this was what it was originally designed for, is that because it was honored. It was an honored time for women where power and rest and visions and messages and intuition, were coming through in a really powerful way. And then they could come back to the community and share that. It wasn't because it was something that was pushed away or dirty or any of these things. But as society began to shift into this more male-dominated social structure, women began to lose any kind of not just power, but respect and esteem. If you think about what was eventually done to women from ancient societies, where in many ancient societies, women were the leaders, women were the shamans, women were the medicine women. They were the ones who took care of all of these things. And women were the ones who gave permission for men to go hunt and kill something, because it was determined that as a woman is the only thing that can give birth to something, she too is the only thing that can take a life from something. So women were the ones who actually stepped into this place, and then society got, women got overtaken. Everything got changed, and we no longer shared equality. And then the world began to change, in many places for the worse, where colonialism started to overtake everything that touched it. And then we moved into, even beyond that, into a capitalist-based society where everything became about money and power. And that was all that really mattered to the world. And so are women naturally subservient, or have we been pushed into that position for so long that what's really happening is a constant conditioning of women that now, I always say to people, the patriarchy never actually has to do anything to us anymore. And because it's the patriarchy that women enforce on women. It's how we hold that bag constantly, because we were so conditioned because of what our mothers and our grandmothers and our great-grandmothers and our great-great-grandmothers were able to have at their disposal and access, and what they were put through, whether, from the witch hunt, where, people talk about, they burned witches. They burned women. Is what they burned. They burned women who, had a certain look, or they burned women who, had good gardens for no extra reason. They burned women who had intuition. I don't know any woman who doesn't have a gut instinct and intuition. So it could have been you, it could have been me. And as they say, we are the daughters of the witches that they didn't burn, but it's because they burned women. They didn't burn witches. And this became, something that once this pain is programmed into us, we know from the study of epigenetics that this gets passed down in our DNA. So women have become more subservient, not because it's our natural state, but because it's our conditioned response to a world that is not created for us to exist in or have a place in. It's the same thing about, why we have the whole world, why women burn out. If people say, well, women are not meant for these positions, it's not actually true. It's just that the masculine energy really thrives and feeds on a 24-hour clock, whereas women's energy is charged and thrives on a 28-day calendar. There's ebbs and flows, and because our world was made in a 24/7 blockade of Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, sort of these hours that the masculine thrives in, but the feminine doesn't. The feminine burns out. And then instead it's like, oh, well, you can't make it in this society unless you have to become more like a man. So women begin to shut down their own power, shut down what makes us unique and different, and give us our own leadership. It's not that we do it better, we do it differently. And there is no room for anything else in this sort of world that we've created, or that's been co-created. Well, it's never co-created, that was created. And now women are trying to step into these bigger positions. And the only way that we've been learning to do it is to kind of become like men. So we have sort of either this big gap between women who become ball busters, who are climbing the corporate ladder and get a reputation or a name, because women like that are not towing the line, or they're sort of doormats. And where's the women in between? Where's all of us that are trying, to be ourselves in a world that was never meant for us to even exist in, right? That the world at some point in time said, this is your role. And any woman who stepped outside of that paid a deep price. And we are standing on the shoulders of the women who came before us, who paved those paths for us. So it is not, in fact, that we are more subservient, or that we're naturally not natural born leaders, or any of this stuff. In actual fact, the world honored and supported women. Masculine energy is in service to the feminine. The feminine energy often was the one who made the decisions, the women who actually came together to create these societies and create all these things. And then the men served it. Now I'm talking about energy versus, you might hear me say men and women, but what I mean here is a very much, not gender-based, but energy-based, in a masculine and feminine energy. And those are true, that each of us has something different that we bring to the table in this, and that we're not all meant to be the same. Women are not supposed to be like men. We're supposed to be like women. Men are not supposed to be like women. Men are supposed to be like men. But we need to honor this so that the divine masculine can rise and the divine feminine can rise, so that we can honor each of our roles, so that we can truly create, societies that are based on equity and equality versus, societies that are built just based on one type of person having all the power and then getting to say what everybody else has to be to fit into that society, so that we're not killed or, raped or any of these things that sort of forced women into a subservient position. It's not that we're naturally subservient. It's just that what happened was we were so deeply conditioned into taking on these roles and believing that that was our only thing, because that was passed down. It's deeply embedded. So it's not actually that we're naturally that, it's we're conditioned that. And what we are doing as we're moving forward into the world is that we are reconditioning and unraveling centuries of conditioning that no longer applies and is not where the world is going, right? We say the future is female, but it's not only female. We're creating a world where lots of people, exist without labels and without sort of being defined by, all of these stereotypes and labels that give us a place to fit into the world. And instead, we're creating a world where, we can be a little bit more individual than needing to fall under certain labels, and creating a world that only exists or supports one type of a person and one type of an energy. And this is why it's so important for us certainly to have these conversations around empowerment, because many women are really trying to move forward. What I notice is so many women are trying to move forward, but not realizing how much of this unraveling still needs to be done inside of us, because it's not the patriarchy out there. We're waiting for these systems to change so that we can change and step into a different power. But what we need to start realizing is it's not so much the patriarchy out there that we need to fight at this stage. We need to start fighting the patriarchy that lives within each of us, because that is where that change will be affected. It's not the system. The system is changing for us. There is changes within the system, but the changes haven't happened with us individually. It's like so many of us are sitting around waiting for the system to completely change, not realizing that we're each a cog in that system, and that the more internally that we shift and change, and that we unravel the patriarchy that lives within ourselves, that we start to create a bigger and faster influence on that system, to be able to change on a community, national, international level, where we will really start to see that is that we individually have to reach inside of ourselves and remove, those blocks that are inside of us that have us conditioned and sort of walking through the world, just doing what we were taught to do without questioning it. So here's my challenge for you. And I would love for you to tell me in the comments what you think. I would also love for you to make sure that you hit subscribe to the channel if you haven't. I see we're getting lots of views, but there's still lots of people not subscribing. So make sure that you subscribe so that every time I post a video, you will be notified. And here's what I'm going to challenge you to do. And I want you to loop back and let me know how this went for you and how you felt when you did this or as you're doing this. But I want you to start questioning yourself. Question, why am I doing this? Is this conditioning or is this my natural response? And let me know how that goes, because I can tell you what, it's not only been a game changer for me, but it's a game changer for all of my clients in the questions that we start to ask ourselves when we start to get curious about why we do the things that we do. When we start to say, is this really me or is this my conditioning? And which one do we want to start choosing? That's how we begin the process of unraveling the constant never-ending conditioning that we have been living under. So do those 3 things. Make sure that you let me know what your biggest takeaway is. Hit subscribe and then loop back and let me know what asking yourself this question does for you. I'll see you on the next one.